Good morning and welcome to another edition of Como Live. My name is John, and today I'd like to talk about the latest addition to the Ordway Gardens Japanese collection, which is actually the restoration of the Huelsmann Foundation Meditative Garden. This will be probably the first garden space that you see when you come into the Ordway Gardens collection, and we'll unveil it for you here today. This new garden, which is essentially composed of just stone and gravel, is called dry landscape style, or kare sansui in Japanese. Sometimes they're just called rock garden or sekite. But the idea here is that the use of the native Minnesota boulders are used to evoke the shape and form of mountains, and the spreading of the gravel is used to evoke the sense and the feeling of water. You can see that there's some raked lines around essentially these islands of stone. And those manipulations to the gravel are kind of like waves breaking on the shore of an island in essentially a large and undisturbed sea. The previous garden here did not actually, the plants didn't cooperate as well as we wanted. So after some thinking, I came up with this design to improve the guest experience, especially when they first enter this wing of the conservatory, but also to help highlight the bonsai terrace that is behind the garden space. And in this latest construction, the technique of using these large elements, the stones, in the foreground has the effect of pulling the background or the middle ground closer to the viewer. And so that was a really nice complement to the concept for this space itself. We also found that after the construction, the very stoic and calm nature of the stones is motionless and almost always the same, but in the background you can see the waving of the Japanese forest grass planted below the bonsai pedestals that adds a nice hint of movement. These types of gardens first became popular in Japan during the feudal period in the 1500s. But their original inspiration came with the migration of Buddhism from China to Japan. And within the sutra scrolls that came with the teachings of Buddha would be these monochromatic India ink paintings of these spectacular landscapes in China that often showed a large mountain with some craggy trees and sometimes a lone hermit walking up a path with firewood on his back. And when these sutras came to Japan, the monks there saw these paintings and were quite impressed that one, with their beauty, but also with the similarity of the landscapes in Japan. And it was actually some of these priests that were some of the earliest garden builders as they began to collect stones from around their own temple properties and then place them by standing them within their confines to create this new style of garden. So now we're going to kind of walk around towards the outside and have another look at the garden where we can actually see the architecture of the conservatory and how this sort of very ancient style of garden works very nicely with both the contemporary architecture of the new bonsai wing and the older architecture of the conservatory itself. Many times you'll hear these gardens referred to as Zen gardens, partly because of their origin in Zen temples, but that name's a bit of a misnomer. Technically, it's the dry landscape style. And in actuality, until about 1900, really from 1850 on, or prior to 1850, this style of garden was just called flat garden. Sometimes it would be basically because it's essentially flat. Sometimes these would be gravel and stone type gardens, but sometimes the flat garden would actually have plantings as well. You can see some areas of soil in between the stones that are sort of raised up. Those will actually be planted with a type of moss next spring. So we'll have a little bit of green and a little bit more sense of a landform created, an island, if you will. The gravel we selected for the garden here is also a Minnesota native. This is a St. Cloud granite chip. It's actually quite fun when it's wet. It has this sort of, I guess, kind of almost burgundy, sort of brown maroonish color. But when it dries out, it kind of has a blue-gray appearance. And so oftentimes you'll see a very sort of whitish gravel used in this space. That can be a little bit difficult in the design sense. For one, I felt it would have been too bright on a sunny day. Plus, because the architecture is predominantly white on the exterior, it wouldn't have felt as warm. But as an added bonus in this application, you can see that the paved stone area of the terrace where the bonsai are and the gravel complement each other very nicely. So also within the composition are a couple of bamboo fence treatments. The one against the north garden wall was my attempt at providing a sort of an organic edge that would help marry the new garden with the architecture of the greenhouse of the north garden. And on the opposite side, we have where we're standing right now, we're in a more modern architecture that has a very sort of formal and handsome cast stone border at the end, so it didn't require that sort of transitional piece to go between the garden space and the architecture. And then the other fence that separates the garden space from the bonsai terrace itself is called a Kinkakuji Gaki, which basically means the fence of Kinkakuji, which is a very famous Buddhist temple in Kyoto, Japan, also known as the Golden Pavilion. So now we'll step outside. And have a look and see how it looks and feels outside here in nature. Here you get a better sense of the formal cast stone plinth at the bottom of the new bonsai wing. And then as we back up a little bit, we can see the expanse of the architecture of the conservatory and how the new composition of the stone installation complements the sort of majestic beauty of the dome of the conservatory and the palm fronds in the top. So it was also an added bonus to the construction of the new garden. So while these gardens have very few plants, they sometimes can be just as maintenance needy as other types of gardens. If there are lots of trees overhead, certainly keeping the leaves out is an important part. But oftentimes all we really need to do is come and smooth the gravel, and then even less frequently rake new patterns into it. So there's a variety of ways the garden can be raked. This one, just sort of its first vision of just waves breaking against some island shores. I'm going to step over here and pull out the rake that we use to apply the patterns into the gravel. So if you were to try and do a garden like this at home, we typically like to have 6 or 8 inches of gravel in which to work with. And so you can see these teeth are quite deep. And so when we go into rake, we put it about halfway down and then begin to put in the pattern that we like. And you have to learn how to kind of work with the rake and how to walk sort of flat-footed so that you don't, one, disturb the pattern that you just put in, but not to put any holes or grooves into area that would essentially be a smooth space. So that's what we have for you today, and hopefully on your next visit you'll come by here and see the new Huelsmann Foundation Meditative Garden.